as with each class, we're going to start this class with psalm of prayer. And the psalm that I'm going to read for you today is Psalm 110. And I chose this psalm because it is actually referred to in the lesson in 1Peter. So we'll see a little quote of set by my right hand as we read through 1Peter. Maybe today or maybe next week, whenever. And I think that we'll be covering, last week we did Psalm 34, that'll be a little bit, we'll be repeating a little bit of that one today. I think we'll get to that one today. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and read that now, and then we'll discuss it very briefly before we get started with the lesson. So, of David, a psalm. The Lord, uppercase L, says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool of your feet, for your feet. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your troops will be willing on your day of battle. Arrayed in holy splendor, your young men will come to you like dew from the morning's womb. The Lord has sworn, and it will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. The Lord is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his wrath. He will judge the nations, heaping up the dead and crushing the rulers of the whole world. He will drink from a brook along the way, and so he will lift his head high.
Amen.
What do you think of when you hear this psalm?
Well, I can't help but laugh because years ago when we were still in the fellowship hall and we were doing a study of lesser known people in the Old Testament, and Melchizedek was one of them, and Elizabeth Simrel came up with this wonderful way to remember his name, Melchizedek.
So that's what you think of.
So that's Melchizedek.
I was remembering the same thing.
You do?
So I took the discussion in a whole different direction than what you were intending, Susan. Oh.
Well, I had to look how to pronounce it too.
Well,
But
taking the seat at your right hand, I always think of, James and John and them saying that who was it that said they wanted to know who was going to get to sit at Jesus's right hand?
yeah, the place of honor.
Yeah.
The Jewish kind of celebrate this particular psalm, and they use it as a prayer of protection to achieve peace with enemies. And it does not sound like a peaceful thing to me.
No, it didn't.
But they use it in a lot of their various recitations, in worship or when they're reading the Torah. But it's a Masonic kind of psalm for them, for their Messiah, and yet it is one of the most quoted psalms in all of the New Testament, because in Christianity we take it to read that David's Lord, I think we have an uppercase L in my Lord says, the Lord says to my Lord, and in Christianity it's usually uppercase, that it's talking about Christ here, and that the Christian faith uses this as a kind of proof that Christ is sovereign, Christ is sitting at the right hand of God, and that's who David is talking about, that the Lord.
I would never interpret it that way.
stuck.
feels very Old Testament to me as a footstool.
Says that in Christianity, this psalm is the cornerstone of Christian theology. It's cited as proof of the plurality of the Godhead and Jesus' supremacy as King, Priest, and Messiah. For this reason, it's the most quoted psalm in the New Testament. And classical Jewish contrast that, saying it's a psalm as either Abraham or David or the Jewish Messiah, but they don't claim that it's Jesus. So that's kind of where we're coming in. And there have been many, many musicians who have written about the song. In Protestantism, Cromwell used it as his favorite fighting song when he was going to battle, you know, that type of thing. So it's been used in many, many ways. And it sounds like a very threatening kind of a psalm to me. It doesn't sound like it's a peaceful kind of thing.
Of course, you know, we do like to find verses to back up whatever it is we want to do.
That's right.
This week, the other day, I went to see the Sistine Chapel exhibit that was over at Stony Point. I think today's the last day for it, you know, with their enlarged photographs of the Sistine Chapel. And I didn't realize all of the paintings are from that Michelangelo did, except for one. All the rest of them are from the Old Testament. And the narration that you can listen to as you go through to look at them, every one of the paintings, they talk about how, and I'm guessing this is based on the theology at the time that Michelangelo did the paintings, how all of them, even though they were depictions of Old Testament people, were indicative of the New Testament. Every one of them was, from the interpretation that you listen to. And I was like, whoa, I'm not sure I can quite go along with that. But for much of Christianity's history, I'm beginning to, it seems like lots of folks interpreted Old Testament stories as being predictors of Jesus and Christ, and that's been very much a part of Christianity. And
well, it's what we learn when we study the Gospels. You know, it's brought out.
The prophets are for telling what's going to happen.
yeah, but I mean, this was beyond the prophets. This was, you know,
They mentioned that this is quoted in Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, Hebrews, 1Peter, Colossians, Corinthians, Hebrews, you know, various places in the Bible, and that Jesus himself quotes this verse during his trial before the Sanhedrin in Matthew, referring to himself. So that's Psalm 110, and there's a lot to learn about that. But the one thing you did mention was, what did you say? Melchizedek or whatever?
yeah, that's how Elizabeth said it. Melchizedek.
Curiosity, you might want to read a little bit more and learn a little bit more about Melchizedek, because that name is Melchizedek. Does anyone know anything about him?
No, it's
Oh.
I remember some, yeah.
Well, he was, it says that some Christians hold that he was a type of Christ, and some other Christians hold that he was Christ himself, and that Melchizedek means king of righteousness or righteousness, and that he was known to have been born from a corpse, and that, so he had no father or mother. He was born fully adult. You know,
Some sci-fi stuff here.
so it's like it was like Game of Thrones, or
That's what I'm saying. It sounds like a movie to me.
So in Hebrews, it says he is without father or mother or genealogy. He is neither beginning of days nor end of life. He continues a priest forever. And that even so the name Melchizedek and Christ are in some cases synonymous, and that I don't know, does anyone know about the Freemasons and what their beliefs are? But they have the seal of the signet of Melchizedek, which they actually call the shield of Christ. So it's an interesting person that we might want to read a little bit more about, although it does sound very, it sounds like a mythological person.
Yeah.
Although when we talk of Christ was born, with just a mother. It would have been really strange if he was born without a mother or a father. That's what Melchizedek was.
Well, that's the story. What I remember, we studied him. He was not an Israelite, and he was a long-lived priest, and that's about all I really remember. It's
Yeah,
about him.
my memory is that he's only mentioned once, and it's like a two story. So there's anything else is just that's probably just tradition, because I don't think that's
Yeah, I agree.
I hadn't either.
Yeah. Okay, well, last week we finished with 1Peter, where we were talking about I believe it was about the slave and instructions to the slaves, and that got a lot of discussion going. Now, this time we're going to pick up with 1Peter 3, 1 through 7. And I see Sarah's getting her Bible out. So as usual, we'll let Sarah go first.
I'm wondering what Joseph Campbell has to say about Melchizedek.
Well, look him up. Do some research on that.
Yeah, because obviously there's a lot of mythology about him through the years. So, but it's interesting that one reference in the Old Testament, and his name does come up pretty often.
Yeah.
For that one reference. Sarah, what book was that? Was Melchizedek? Was he in Genesis?
I think Genesis, yeah.
Okay.
But it actually says here, to repeat the statement in the psalm, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Okay, in the order. So speaking of Christ, or whoever this person is, whoever is the subject of this psalm, is being compared to the order of Melchizedek. Okay, 1Peter 3, 1 through 7.
Wives, in the same way, accept the authority of your husbands, so that even if some of them do not obey the word, they may be won over without a word by their wives' conduct when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Do not adorn yourselves outwardly by braiding your hair and by wearing gold ornaments or fine clothing. Rather, let your adornment be the inner self with the lasting beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in God's sight. It was in this way long ago that the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by accepting the authority of their husbands. Thus Sarah obeyed Abraham and called him Lord. You have become her daughters as long as you do what is good and never let fears alarm you. Husbands, in the same way, show consideration for your wives in your life together, paying honor to the woman as the weaker sex, since they too are also heirs of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing may hinder your prayers. That hurt to read.
Was interesting.
You know, as mentioned, they're giving Sarah as an example, and I thought Sarah was pretty tough lady.
Yeah, she
You
was.
know,
Yeah.
So, and the commentator even mentioned, that even mentioned that at one point, that, yes, Sarah was not the believing, the kind of a woman that they might be describing here. But again, just like with this, when they were talking about addressing the slaves, where they were actually saying, in the same way, wives, in the same way, And so really one of the things that's being discussed throughout this is that these recommendations are not just for the wives and the slaves, they're for the whole Christian community. Okay, and we talked about with the slaves, what some of the reasoning behind being more submissive might be just to be better than, rising up and taking over, being more Christ-like with that. And if a wife, can you imagine if a wife and her husband, and the husband is not a Christian, and the wife rises up and tries to force that rather than showing love, what would the husband do? Because at that time, husbands just by their word could say, get rid of her.
Yeah. But the thing that gets me though is if the wives were already submissive because of cultural mores, how is this changing her day-to-day behavior in such a way that she's setting an example for her husband? What's different?
Well, what I've been taught on this was really, you remember Peter was the missionary to the Jews, and of course Paul was to the Greeks. So there were a lot of Greeks coming into the church who were becoming Christians, and that the whole reference of adorning yourself and the gold and the stuff like that was a reference to don't become like these Greek women in the church. You guys remember who you are.
Okay.
Okay, you're not Greek, and you're not.
Yeah.
That's not something that the Lord appreciates.
And
That it was really kind of a slap to the
Okay.
Greek church
Okay.
at the time, the women of the Greek church.
And the commentator, just to back that up, it says Romans were suspicious of foreign cults from Egypt, which encourages women to wear loud clothing and call attention to themselves. Christians should remove suspicion that they belong to those kinds of cults. Their dress shouldn't call attention to themselves. They shouldn't stand out.
Right. Greek women braided their hair and did all that, yeah.
Mhm.
But yes, Egyptians, it'd be the same, the influences.
I pulled my the women's Bible commentary, this commentary I have that was written by all women, and see what they said about this passage. And this book was written 30 years ago. So what the commentator for this passage said was this in the slavery section was in those times, slaves and women, didn't have much power, and that this was basically counsel for those folks when they were in abusive situations, how to survive.
That's an interesting twist.
Yeah. But it's like when you read it, Sarah, it was like we live in the 50s again, and all the Good Housekeeping magazine articles and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, I just have a quick flash here. I watched this program Craft in America, and this woman makes jewelry out of junk, but she's particularly interested in things from the 50s and so forth. And so one was a can of some kind of cleaning product, and it showed this woman all dressed up in high heels
And
sweeping
pearls.
the floor.
Pearls.
Pearls, yeah.
Yeah, the good old days.
That's what my mother believed her entire life.
Yeah.
Well, in the video that I mentioned last week, where with the Bible Project, what they say about this particular, the problem was that it was expected that everyone in the household would submit to and worship the patriarchs' gods, okay, the gods of the man of the household. And so Peter is aware that giving allegiance to Jesus will generate suspicion. So Peter says it's true, all Christians including Roman wives and slaves, have been fully liberated by Jesus, but they are to demonstrate that freedom not through rebellion, but by resisting evil the same way Jesus did, through showing love and generosity to your enemies. So speaking of their husband as the enemy, whatever. In the homes where the husband was also Christian, it's a different story. In this last section, that last verse, husbands in the same way should be considerate. It says they are to treat their wives totally different from the Roman neighbors, regarding them as equals before God who are worthy of honor and respect. And Peter's hope that this imitation of Jesus's love and upside down kingdom, which we've heard before, will give power to their words as they bear witness to God's mercy and show people the beautiful truth about the way of Jesus. So that was a little excerpt from that review of 1 Peter for the Bible Project. And then we go into, it says, but Peter's also a realist, and he knows that Christians will continue to be persecuted. So he reminds them of what of what the future might bring. So in the next verses 8 through 12, if someone has that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Say it again.
1 Peter 3, 8 through 12. And this is where Psalm 34, there's a section of this, whoever would love life, that when it begins that's from Psalm 34.
Okay, finally, all of you have unity of spirit, sympathy, love for one another, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil or abuse for abuse, but on the contrary, repay with a blessing. It is for this that you are called, that you might inherit a blessing. For those who desire life and desire to see good days, let them keep their tongues from evil and their lips from speaking deceit. Let them turn away from evil and do good. Let them seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil.
So that last section was from Psalm 34. So it's bringing it back to all Christians, finally, all of you. Be like-minded, sympathetic, compassionate, humble. And if remember, Jesus taught in Matthew, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.
So how do you do that, other than today's obvious conflict with Russia? How do you extend love to Putin when it's bombed up half your country and threatening you with nuclear weapons? Do you think that's really going to change anything if I say, oh, I love you? How do you stand up to anybody like that, whether they're gang leaders or companies or whatever? Somewhere in the Bible, it says there is a time for peace, there's a time for war. I don't really want to be in war, but there's a whole conflict here that I don't understand.
I think the word love has been mistranslated into meaning, the kind of love we feel for each other in our class. I think the love that he was speaking of in the correct translation just means do no evil or seek no revenge. Don't look for reprisal. I think that's more what that word translates to be in this sense.
I don't know, no reprisal. Does that mean don't fight back?
Well, I mean, for me, I would just love to see Putin, torn to shreds. I mean, that's the kind of love I would like to send to him. But in the perfect Christian world, I mean, what did Christ do when they came to get him? Last week we talked about him being a pacifist. I have thought a lot about that this last week, and I realized I'm not much of a pacifist, so I guess that's something I have to work on.
It's
Would-
It's the hardest thing we ever have to deal with, is how to be loving. I mean, you've been to war. You've been in the heat of it. And, you know, it's so difficult to separate yourself. My cousin was in Vietnam, and it was so difficult when he got back to come back to a normal life, you know, from what he had been in.
You lose the sensitivity, you become desensitized.
Yeah.
You see stuff, but you just start taking it.
You know, I think of people who just go through a small, you know, not a small, but a trauma that might just last, you know, a day or a week or a moment, you know, and how much it affects them for the rest of their lives.
Well, I don't want to dwell on that and bring us down. I don't think any of us who've not been in war can.
But I think that it's one of the biggest questions that we have to ask ourselves, is how to live in this world, you know, as a Christian and follow Christ. And I think that the only way I can live with it is to try to be as loving and thoughtful to people as I can, and to share and to try to give, and yet, you know, it's very easy to get angry. But Christ got angry too. And he says, forgive your enemies, but he had enemies, and he didn't ever have anything good to say about the Pharisees or the Jewish people in the Bible. I don't think he said anything good about them ever.
He had dinner with a Pharisee. Jesus had dinner with a Pharisee.
Yeah. Well, and the Pharisee wasn't the person, Joseph, who gave him his grave, you know, was he in the Sanhedrin?
I don't know. Nancy posted a comment about the war and stuff, that to first fight the war, but then no Versailles Treaty like after World War I. And also to be sure you guys know, Claire and Bernie are also on Zoom this morning too.
Say something, Bernie and Claire.
But they've got, both have their mics turned off.
Okay, okay.
I'm here.
We don't see your picture. We don't see your picture until you talk.
Yeah.
Put it on the iPhone.
Yeah, we have some equipment challenges at the church this morning.
Yeah, you're breaking up occasionally, and I'm multitasking.
Yeah, well, we're sorry. This morning we were having to do it on my iPhone instead of traditional, because David wasn't here with his computer. So we'll have to work that out for next week.
Okay, either that or pay your bill.
Okay. But it is a hard question. It's sometimes you just
Well, I
gotta
send my
fight.
love to Ukraine, and then they can figure it out.
Well, and help them as much as we can.
They can send their love on to.
Okay, and then the next, let's see, we just had through there, okay. And next section is a area called, labeled by our commentators, responsible suffering in the face of hostility. And we'll really like this. It goes through, someone read from 13 through 22.
I can read it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. No one can hurt you if you are determined to do only what is right. And blessed are you if you have to suffer for being upright. Have no dread of them, have no fear. Simply proclaim the Lord Christ holy in your hearts. And always have your answer ready for people who ask you the reason for the hope you have. but give it with courtesy and respect and with a clear conscience, so that those who slander your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their accusations. And if it is the will of God that you should suffer, it is better to suffer for doing right than for doing wrong. Christ himself died once and for all, Christ himself died once and for all for sins, the upright for the sake of the guilty, to lead us to God. In the body he was put to death, in the spirit he was raised to life, and in the spirit he went to preach to the spirits in prison. They refused to believe long ago, while God patiently waited to receive them in Noah's time when the ark was being built. In it, only a few, that is 8 souls, were saved through water. It is the baptism corresponding to this water which saves you now, not the washing off of physical dirt, but the pledge of a good conscience given to God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has entered heaven and is at God's right hand, with angels, ruling forces, and powers subject to him.
And there's that reference to Psalm 110 with at God's right hand, with angels and authorities and powers submission to him. So he's basically, what is he basically saying here? Christ suffered, so be ready.
Ready to suffer.
Be
That
ready
made
to
me think
suffer.
of what Bud was saying too. What do you do when you may have to suffer for your good behavior?
Yeah. Because people are often, when they're trying to do good, it doesn't turn out so well.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You
Is
know?
that saying? No good deed goes unpunished.
So the Christians are being instructed, or we are being instructed, to do what's right despite our temptation to retaliate. Now, let's also think back to who are these people being persecuted by right now? It's not the government that he's writing this letter to. It's their community.
Yeah.
You know, so it's kind of, I don't know whether the comparison would be right, but it would be more like when you're in high school and you have the cliques and you have everyone kind of, it's better to join a group and do what they do rather than trying to do good. You know, although when I think of the husbands and what their rights were over wives or over their slaves, you know, at that time, it's not like a high school clique. It's the society itself, and the society that they're living in is what they're being threatened with, and to be Christians in that kind of society. So they label this responsible suffering.
Yeah, you said that a few minutes ago, and
Responsible suffering. Peter 3:13 through 5:11 is responsible suffering. So we're supposed to suffer. Christ said, pick up your cross and follow me. You know, it says, do what's good, even if you suffer, there is hope. And suffering for doing good, that using Christ as a model for us.
With the black congressman that was that died recently, talks about good trouble.
Mhm.
John Lewis.
Yeah.
John Lewis. That's what
Yeah,
that reminds
yeah.
me of, and walking across the bridge facing death
On the bus.
on the bus.
And that sometimes is the only way to change things.
Well, I think, and what keeps
And-
coming to my mind as we talk this morning is in these days and times about the political divisions spreading into, neighborhood relationships and family relationships, that because you don't support the same person that I do politically, then you're wrong and I'm right. And I think this passage is reminding us we have to take the high road. And we're still responsible to love all of us.
We hear so much on television about the division we are supposedly having, and how we, and it's just no matter what channel, it seems just vile, language about everyone. But and yet when I go out into the society, and I'm mostly going to therapy back, I don't meet anybody that acts that way or treats me that way, or even, I just wonder how much of this is some sort of propaganda they're spewing out versus I don't see it in society that I bump into. And at therapy, I bump into a lot of different people of different, economic levels, and they are all nice and all loving. The ones I bump into, and I'm sure there are some that are not, but I guess what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't believe the propaganda that we're being preached day in, day out.
Well, I think I have the same experiences when you go out to a restaurant and you sit down next to someone and you start talking with them, or you're a community in itself. But I also, we have a Miata club and we drive all around the state. And there are some pretty wicked signs out there on the side of the road in people's yards.
Black flag, no border, and all
And
that.
so it's sometimes you see that, but one-on-one, with people, generally we're all wanting the same things, kinds of things.
Yeah, although I have experienced it firsthand at a family reunion. I have one cousin who lives out in California, and she is just as rabid liberal as they can be. And there was one family, for the most part, the group didn't talk about politics. You don't talk religion, you don't talk. Well, she and her brother started bad-mouthing conservatives. And although I'm more moderate, I don't consider myself a conservative or liberal, but it was just venom there. And I'm sitting there going, whoa, I don't want to be part of this.
Right, because
And-
and I've experienced, when I was at the beach a couple of weeks ago, there was a house down the street from us that she had filled whoever lived there had filled the entire yard with seashells that were painted with all kinds of profanity and negative statements against the current administration. The yard was covered in this, and I didn't even know what some of them meant, and I had to look them up and learned what they meant. And so I think there is, and I've come across some people that have been even within my own family that have been pretty negative towards me. And like Sarah, I think I'm pretty much of a moderate, but so I think it is out there, Harold, but I think I don't see a lot of it too within my own circles on a day-to-day basis.
Right, and I didn't mean it wasn't out there at all. I'm just saying, by and large, I don't, don't run, but there are always demons possessed people, I'm convinced, and there are people out there that are just full of hate and that type thing. But by and large, the people I bump into seem to not be that way. There's always a few,
Well, I think it varies from place to place and time to time. So, but either way, we're still called to love everybody. And
you don't want me to weigh in on this, so.
Yeah, because yeah. Either way, we're still called. Our calling hasn't changed, and I think there's a greater need for this calling that Peter reminds us of. So,
I think it just comes down to love, and that we are, as Christians, we are called to love. And in some instances, it is definitely more challenging than in others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and being called to love sometimes means tough love.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And that being called to love and to love what, I think that one of the Ukrainians, were some of them, I'm more proud of them than any other people on earth, because I know about what's going on, there a little bit, and cannot believe what they have done. And so want to help them, with their plight. And therefore I need to be against the other side and cannot believe what that side is doing. And so if we're trying to do what is good, then how do we help? How do we not say that we're going to help them fight? And I think that we are helping provide armaments and things like that, but it's hard.
I think you can, I don't know if it's my age or whatever, but I could pull the trigger to protect my family and protect others. I don't know that I could pull the trigger to protect myself anymore. I don't know that I'm willing to take a life to preserve mine at my age, or I don't know. It's kind of a different scenario now for me.
Well, shoot him in the shoulder then.
He said, shoot him in the shoulder.
Okay.
Well, as they say in West Virginia, drag him over the thrash dog.
Yeah.
You don't have to hurt them, you just have to piss them off, really.
Oh, that'll make it so much better.
Oh, yeah.
We digress.
Yes.
Well, to answer, Susan posed the question, what do we do with Ukraine? How do we think about that? But do we not look at what action saves the most lives? And is that action loving? Even though that action may take some lives.
Well, that was the whole justification for dropping a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
It was.
How many people we would save by ending the war sooner. It didn't, for me, that was kind of like, well, I'll do one evil that may prevent another evil. I don't know. I don't know what to think about that. I get stuck there.
Payback for Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but innocent people.
Oh, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
I mean, would given the chance we have shot Hitler? I mean, let's get real.
No,
No.
I hear what you're saying. It's a place I get stuck. Is because
Well, let me help you next time you're stuck there.
Well, on that note, I'm sorry. I
That's
have to
right.
leave.
That's right. That's right.
Only because of the time
Okay.
that I'm serving.
Okay, so we'll get started next time with 1 Peter 4.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Because I think I'm next week.